All right, welcome, and thanks for waking up early, and I apologize, Caleb. These guys showed up and didn't realize that I was the speaker, and they know me, and they're like, this guy's here? So, yeah, I apologize for that. The title of my talk today is The Blind Men and the Elephant, the Art of History. I'll get to what that is about towards the end, but first off, I'm going to give a little bit of background to... Well, we'll start with corruption, actually. A quick disclaimer, I don't plan talks, I don't think about what I'm going to say, and I just kind of show up and start yapping, so, bear with me. So corruption, dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power, typically involving bribery. The process by which something, typically a word or expression, is changed from its original use or meaning to one that is regarded as erroneous or debased. I was born in England, and at a very early age I had the luxury of being taken to the British Museum, the National Gallery, Walker Art Museum, and I got a very classical background to art history. My grandfather showed me this kind of trajectory from early humans, fragments of pottery, right through to Rembrandt and the Sistine ceiling. So I saw this kind of evolution of human consciousness, of society, and I saw it all through the arts. And I saw what was possible, these kind of epic expressions of an attempt to understand what it is to be human, and I was enamored of it. I was seduced by the painting, the sculpture, the technical ability of humans. As I got a little older, I got into punk rock and skateboarding, and I realized that a lot of these things were kind of stories and myths, and I started to question these histories. I started to question the institutions that house these paintings. And then I started to ask, well, how did the British Museum get Greek marbles? Why do they have, Tutankhamun's fragments? Why are these things in the wrong countries? And all these questions began to arise in my mind. A little further on, I kind of found Buddhism and I found meditation, and these two kind of polar extremes got kind of righted. They got pulled back to a center. In the Zen tradition, there's something called a koan. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but a koan is a riddle that's given to a Zen practitioner. It's something that's meant to provoke the great doubt. So as a Zen practitioner sits down, the instructor will give them a koan. One of the most famous ones is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? There's no answer to these riddles. They're meant to be like Rubik's Cubes for the mind. And they're meant to make us kind of fumble with a question so we slowly unlock our thinking. The koan that really resonated with me was, if you see the Buddha on the road, you should kill him. As I was kind of exploring the idea of Buddhism and meditation, I also had one foot in this kind of classical history of art and these artifacts of antiquity. We all go to the houses and Buddhas are sitting on the mantles and sitting by the front door, and our yoga classes are filled with all these icons. They're all illusion. They're not the idea of Buddha. Buddha is a state of mind. It's a place. It's not a thing or a person. So the idea of this koan is that the thing that we start to pursue, if it becomes so concrete, we should smash it because it's not real. It's an illusion. And only through this kind of freeing ourselves from it can we actually find the real truth and see what's beneath it. As a student of history and painting and art and freedom to kind of smash things from my punk rock kind of moments, and I found this place where I was able to look at the things that I loved and cared about and take them apart to see if they held any water, to poke holes in it, to kill my own Buddha. So this made me really look at the history of art, and I really looked at the history of people, because they're one and one for me. I saw them side by side. There was no separation. William Blake said that the world is in a grain of sand, meaning that everything is contained within anything. It's all there. Famous Buddhist prayer is emptiness is form, form is emptiness. Out of nothing comes everything, and within it, nothing is everything. So in these paintings, I started to look at what we are as people. I started to look at the corruption that has occurred throughout all of our history on both a grand, scale globally, right down to our own personal corruptions and our own ideas and like how we contradict ourselves, how our actions maybe don't align with our thoughts and vice versa. So this took me to a place where I began to dismantle my paintings. I started to really take them apart. Things like graffiti, the language of, this kind of urban protest that I found in my teen years, I started to see differently. I started to see in the same light as a young boy that would have been illuminating manuscripts in the 14th century. I could now see that kid in a street corner in Hastings painting on a wall. I was like, this is the same human. It's just the questioning is what was important, the asking. So all of my work is a constant looking at who we are, where we come from, what we're made of, and then trying to take it apart and understand it. I like to use the language of the past because it is something that I kind of learned and I grew up with. And to truly kind of understand it, to question it, we have to go there and then take it apart. And this is back to that koan. They're really like playing with the riddle, playing with the puzzle. So all of art has really become that for me. I started to look at things like our religions, our political structures, our philosophies, and they're all just versions of reality. None of them are true. In fact, we were having a little conversation here before it began about, the recent kind of chatbots and AI and all of these things that are emerging, and I speak to artists that are in a panic because how it's going to be misused, and this is all we've ever done. Herodotus, one of our earliest recorders of history, was known as the father of history and the father of lies because he was unabashedly making up stories. He was recording what was happening, but then he'd be like, well, that was a little boring. I'm going to dress it up a bit. I'm going to make this guy a little better. I'm going to make her a little worse. And we created these stories, and that's all any of it is stories. As each of you leave today, you'll all have a version of what happened. None of them will be what happened. They'll all be based on our own data sets, on our own memories, and we'll have a version of what occurred. So everything exists in this way. And so this idea of the koan, to constantly question it, to constantly poke holes in it, even my romantic kind of version of my childhood in which my grandparents lovingly showed me, the craquelure of a Rembrandt, is probably bullshit. It probably was someone yelling at me because I'd stuck my sticky hand on a painting, but we have a version. And so it's about always questioning that and trying to understand the corruption. So I literally began to peel back the layers, to literally unveil what was underneath. The ancient alchemists made an attempt to transmute base metals into gold, so lead to gold. This was both early chemistry and an attempt to kind of understand a spiritual awakening in which we could move like the lotus out of the mud, reaches the light and unfolds into this beautiful flower in Eastern mysticism. So the ancient alchemists believed they could transmute base lead metals to the shiny zenith of gold. It didn't escape me that lead paint was used for many years, and could the transmutation of lead paint base materials edify or elevate the human experience? Could we look at art and be lifted to something higher than what we are? An image of a Jesus-like figure is not Jesus. We don't even know what Jesus was, and we all have different views on that, and none of them are correct, and all of them are correct. So for me, it's just about peeling it back, trying to look at it, poking holes in it, questioning it. There is still a deep-rooted belief in the ability of art to lift us, to take us somewhere, to leave different than when we arrived. You know, by listening to a piece of music, by watching a film, reading a poem. We're not the same as when we began. And it still is the thing that can elevate consciousness, that can still move us beyond the corruption, beyond the lies, beyond the mistruths and stories. It's an attempt, it's an honest human attempt to understand what we are. So again, peeling back, questioning, and it's all really I've ever done. You know, in recent years, we've seen statues toppled in the wake of kind of our questioning, pulling off these false heroes. It's a recent piece called Erase, in which, you know, the equestrian, the use of an equestrian symbol in art is it's a long, storied history that's got some beautiful kind of subversive qualities. You know, the posture of the horse alludes to the quality of the rider and what they did in their time. A rearing horse, you know, spoke of that they died in battle, versus a small trot is this kind of, they never actually did anything. They were a charlatan that kind of had themselves placed on this horse. So again, you know, it's been beautiful to watch the world start to poke holes in these false heroes and really reconcile our histories, and that allows us to move forward. It's like a collective koan that's been occurring. We've been killing the Buddha on the road. These kind of stories that we were sold, you know, I mean, we all went to school and got these base histories of grand people that did great things, and you get a little older and you're like, wait a minute, that guy's an asshole. You know, none of these things are as they seem. So, you know, I think art just gave me that opportunity to really question it all. And, you know, the paintings are what's kind of left over of the questioning. I often liken them to like a shed skin of a snake. You know, it's a marker of growth. It's like a thing where we tried to understand, and this is what's left. And it's, you know, people hang snake skins on their wall, don't they? I think that kind of happens. The blind man and the elephant, what was that all about? The blind man and the elephant is a parable that's been spoken of in Buddhism, Hinduism, I believe Jainism even speak of it. And it's this story of an elephant coming out that had never been experienced before. And I think there's 5 or 6 blind men in some of the various stories. They each approach the elephant from a different perspective. One gets the trunk, another the tail, one gets to touch its foot, another gets to hold its tusk, and they're asked to explain the elephant. Now, as one can imagine, these are all entirely different versions of the elephant. And they're all true, but none of them are the same. And this is how we all experience all of it. You know, we spoke a moment ago about neurologically what occurs in us is, you know, from early age, approximately 0 to 7, we build up our data sets of what the world is. We learn that, you know, mom cuddles us, dad yells at us, the fire's hot when we put our hand in it, candy's sweet, you know, orange rind is sour. We have this full data set so that when we move through life, our brains access these data sets every time we see an orange or we see mom, and we then make a predictive outcome. This is what will happen if mom comes in the room. She'll hug me. And this is how we live in this constant back and forth without ever really being present and just questioning a new moment. And so this idea of like how we experience reality is really something that we can be in control of. We can poke holes in our own notions of it and our own ideas. You know, these data sets, these neurological pathways, yes, they're kind of built, but they're not true. Moms both hugged me and yelled at me, so, you know, that's not a true data set. And so we have to realize that and question it all, poke holes in it, and, you know, understand where the corruption lies. And that allows us to be free and to move on and to evolve as a species, I think. I have no idea how long I've been talking. Has it been 5 minutes or 15 minutes?
Another 5 or so?
Yeah. So, you know, I don't know if anybody has any questions about the work. I'm happy to kind of go back and speak specifically about pieces.
Just a heads up for everybody, due to the numerous punk rock shows that Carl has attended, you might need to project your voice a bit. So make sure you speak loudly.
Actually, one thing I was wondering, do you have any shows like coming up or?
Any shows coming up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have some work. I represent in Calgary by Christine Klassen Gallery, which is just off McLeod and 50th Avenue. So I have some work up there right now, some paperworks actually, in a group show. In Victoria in May, Pennsylvania in April. Yeah, constantly. Calgary maybe late fall, I'm thinking. Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm actually just wondering what it looks like live, like the use of the frame on everything. Is
Yeah.
Frame with the artwork contained within, or is the frame painted as well?
Yeah, no, I'm making the frames as well. I mean, you know, this piece is called Vanitas. So Vanitas was a period in Dutch painting that artists were hired to kind of paint in the finest way, like to showcase their talents. They would paint, you know, fruit and a fish and a vessel of bronze and flowers. And it was this kind of like virtuoso display of painting that the wealthy were basically hiring the painters to do. But there was a very subversive message occurring in which these painters were using symbols about the fragility of life and our immortality. You know, a wilting flower alluded to impending death. It was all about the illusion of this object that it would, you know, we put the Mona Lisa behind bulletproof glass and we stand back from it and we're in awe, and yet it is crumbling behind that very glass. There's nothing we can do. This is the nature of life. It's this kind of, this want of humans to hold something permanent forever, you know, building mausoleums and tombs to our memories. You know, we're like a little blip in this history of a universe. None of it matters. It's just a moment. And that is what matters, you know. So I look at those symbols like this Dutch painting, and I'm kind of taking that idea of Vanitas even further. So I make the frames, and I started to break them down with rust and peel away the canvas to kind of accelerate the process to make the message maybe a little louder in a contemporary kind of light. I have no idea if that answered your question. Nor do I care. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's interesting, right? Because when I was younger, I was always enamored of dance and music because there were these kind of kinetic living art forms that constantly changed and lived. You know, a new dancer takes on a piece. Beethoven's Ninth is still played and it's reimagined, it's re-experienced. And I'm like, painters, you know, we make this thing and then it's like sits there. It's like inert, this kind of dead artifact, right? And it was that coupled with being trapped by the parameters of the canvas. You know, a quick side note on that is years ago I had an engineer come visit my studio. Like, I want to come see your paintings, and he came in and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, kind of gave me a yawn kind of, you know, emoji, and I was like, hell dude, and he's like, you artists are so lame. He's like, you think you're creative? He's like, you come in the same little room, you sit in your same little chair, you pour out your same 5 paints, and you paint on your same little canvas. He's like, you think that's creative? He's like, you're trapped in this. I was just like, fuck this guy, right? But he was so correct. Like, it made me question that from that moment. Like, holy shit, like we think we're taking these leaps and we're doing nothing. I'm like, I added a little more yellow today, buddy. Like, like check this out. And so that made me kind of start to break away from the frame. I do a lot of things in the gallery space where that piece would then have text behind it on the walls. I had a show at a museum actually during the pandemic in which nobody saw the show. Big museum exhibition, not a soul walked in. But anyway, I hung all these paintings, and they're like, we want you to do something on the walls like you do. And I'm like, sure. So I was writing this kind of poetry, and felt like it should have like this hot pink kind of splattered across the walls. And so I'm in this huge room, like probably twice as big as this. And the paintings are all there, and I'm like, I want to throw paint across this wall. And the curators are like, oh yeah, we love it, blah, 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 blah. They're like, let's take the paintings down. And they moved them. One piece was like at the double end of this away. And it's sitting, and no one turned it back, right? And, there's that kind of punk rock kid in me was like, I was kind of stoked, like, and I had I get these graffiti markers these kids make. There's a company out in New York, this guy makes this pigment that's like bulletproof. It's amazing. Like you cannot buff this off. Like it'll permeate through any kills. Like incredible. Like these kids should work for NASA. They figured out how to make like. Anyway, I had this stuff because I love the idea of I've long left and these guys are still scrubbing the floor trying to get the hot pink off. And I threw this paint, and I wanted the splatter to run along the wall, and the cap came off, of course, and this thing fucking went, and like I have a better arm than what I thought, actually, and I hit the painting at the very end, and this fucking pink was all over it, and it was actually amazing. Like, there's no way I'm getting that off. Like, it's on there forever. It's better than the paint that I use. And it's this extension of the work, right? It grows past, and my earlier comment about being enamored of dance and kinetic arts is that it got to live again. It got to kind of step into the contemporary moment. So I know I'm way off your question, but I am still around it. So this idea of extending beyond the picture frame is kind of something that's always really interesting to me. So the framing itself started to become part of the piece. And the wall, I'm building a small shed out back. Yeah, it's a very long-winded one, yeah. Any other things you'd like me to make up a story about? Yeah.
Yeah, so since 92, you've gone through different, periods or different, expressions, throughout the years. Has there maybe been something looking back now that you realize common thread, like right now you're exploring this.
Yeah.
But has there been something?
For sure. Like I'm probably a philosopher that makes paintings. Like I spend a lot more time thinking than I do painting. The painting's kind of, just a way for me to kind of explore the ideas. And when I look back, they say we really have a idea in life, if we're lucky. You know what I mean? And they're all kind of various extrapolations of it, but it's ultimately that thing, right, that we're trying to understand. And really, I remember driving with my dad when I was probably 10 years old, maybe, and we're driving home from soccer or whatever it was, and, I'm like, Dad, I don't think I believe in God. And I see him look at me, and he's just like, fuck, like, why did I get this kid, right? Like, can't we talk about like soccer? And, so from that really young years, I was just like questioning it, like just, and not like because I thought there was anything wrong. I just love understanding it. And so, really what painting kind of became was just trying to understand this vocabulary of painting. And so ultimately that's all it's ever been, and it began initially as learning to paint, which was an inquiry into painting. How does paint work? What do I do with it? Then once I had these kind of skill sets available, it was like, okay, now take it apart and try and, you build a radio and then you take it apart to understand how it works, right?